ANA eLearning Academy is brought to you by CDN Graysheet, a trusted source of rare coin and currency valuations since 1963.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the ANA eLearning Academy. The ANA would like to thank our e-learning partner, Graysheet, for their support of the e-learning program. Today, we have Douglas Mudd, our ANA Museum Director and Curator, who will be presenting Colonial Currency, German East Africa. Now, all attendees will be muted for this presentation. If you have any questions, you may put them in the chat or Q&A box, and I will read them to our presenter at the end of the presentation. I will now turn the time over to Doug for his presentation. When you're ready, sir, you may begin.
Thanks very much, Sam. I hope everybody's having a good morning. We seem to have gotten through our technical issues, so we will now be able to learn something about the colonial currency of German East Africa. Today I'll be talking about some of the many little-known aspects of numismatic history, and this area counts as one of those. Not too many people are very aware of German East Africa, nor are they aware that there was actually money issued there. But German East Africa has fascinated me because it's the location of one of the last regions of the world to be explored, the inhabited regions of the world to be explored. The old phrase darkest Africa referred to Central Africa and East Africa equally for centuries, and exploration was the stuff of legends. As a kid, this really inspired me, and so I was always excited about reading stories about the region. The search for the source of the Nile, Henry Morton Stanley, David Livingstone, Richard Burton, John Speke, Samuel Baker, all of these explorers played a part in developing my interest in the region. When I discovered the numismatic background of what was to become Tanzania, my interest was piqued yet again. So I ask you today to follow me on this numismatic exploration of a fascinating and truly interesting region of the world. So, prior to the 19th century, the coast of East Africa was colonized by Arab slave traders. They settled along the coast, venturing into the interior with their caravans in search of slaves. As they began to penetrate further into the interior, they also discovered ivory, which in time became as important to their commerce as the slave trade. Tabora and Ujiji on Lake Tanganyika became the most important trading posts along these routes. In East Africa, during the early to mid-19th century, there was no central authority large or powerful enough to establish a universal currency standard. So money was basically whatever the local people would accept, sometimes changing from village to village in certain circumstances. There was no way to force a single standard. Nevertheless, there did appear a standard of sorts over the course of the century as Arab slavers, Indian merchants, and Omani and Zanzibari sultans increased their influence within the region. This standard was based on the use of cowrie shells, Indian rupees, and Maria Theresa thalers, as shown in the slide. All three were introduced from abroad through trade. Cowrie shells from the islands of the Indian Ocean, Maria Theresa thalers through Arab traders, and Indian rupees through Indian merchants during the last quarter of the century. One of the really interesting things that I learned at one point was how everybody knows that the English had the largest empire in the 19th century across the world. They were used to having English gold coins, sovereigns, and English coinage in general be accepted, or else Spanish American coins, the pieces of 8 and that kind of thing. When they got to East Africa, though, in the 1850s and later, even as late as 1880s, certain areas were still trading only using cowrie shells and Maria Theresa thalers as the standard method of buying or selling things. And the English explorers were outraged to find that gold sovereigns were not accepted. They were outraged enough so that they actually wrote home and asked if the London government could do something about it. And eventually, London actually began to strike Maria Theresa thalers in order to be able to use them in the trade in East Africa. The first Europeans to show an interest in colonizing East Africa were the missionaries of the London-based Church Mission Society. At this time, other explorers were active in their attempt to locate the source of the Nile River, thus stimulating increased interest in the region as well. These geographical explorations probed deeper and deeper into the interior, eventually leading to the discovery of Lake Victoria and Lake Nyassa by Richard Burton and John Speke. These men were soon followed by such well-known adventurers as David Livingstone and H.M. Stanley. All of this contributes to the aura of legend and excitement and mystery that existed at the time, that attracted many people, many Europeans during the second half of the 19th century. Here's a map talking about the partition of Africa. The Germans, though latecomers to colonialism, were able to stake claims in this new world as the African continent began to be subdivided. And they managed to get access to 4 regions, Southwest, East, West, and the Gold Coast of Africa during the last decades of the 19th century. They acquired these territories with the approval of the great powers who met in Berlin in 1884 through 1885. At the request of Portugal, in 1884, the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called together the major European powers to discuss control of Africa. 14 countries were represented at the conference on November 15, 1884. They were Austria, Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Turkey, and the United States. France, Germany, Great Britain, and Portugal were the major players in this conference. So basically, these countries got together to decide how Africa would be divided up. Classic colonialism at its worst. No Africans were represented at the time, with the exception of Ethiopia for a little bit. At the time of the conference, 80% of Africa remained under local rule. What ultimately resulted was a hodgepodge of geometric boundaries that divided Africa into 50 countries. This new map of the continent was superimposed over the old tribal and cultural boundaries and regions of Africa. The new countries divided coherent groups of people and merged together disparate groups with results that are still felt today, as we know. German East Africa was located in Eastern Africa in what is now part of modern Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. The Germans first laid claim to these territories in 1885 when the Deutsches Ostafrikanische Gesellschaft, German East Africa Company, was formed to colonize and exploit the resources of the region. Germany, together with Great Britain, focused its interest upon East Africa. These efforts began in 1884 when the German Dr. Karl Peters, one of the founders of the German Colonization Society, set out for East Africa in search of a suitable colony. In November of that year, Peters succeeded in concluding a series of treaties with the local chiefs. Kaiser Wilhelm II accepted these somewhat questionable claims as valid, and the German government declared a protectorate over the area in 1885. The German East Africa Company was organized to administer the newly acquired colony. At that time, the Sultan of Zanzibar also held a vaguely substantiated claim to territory on the mainland. Zanzibar is a large island off the coast of East Africa where the Sultan of Oman had his government and had ruled for about a century, a little less than a century, in part to control the slave trade in the region, which was very lucrative. In 1891, after several native uprisings, Germany took direct control of GEA and made it the German East Africa Company and the colony. And by 1898, Germany succeeded in occupying all of the interior. These claims were eventually, by 1898, Germany succeeded in occupying all of the interior of German East Africa, and the claims of Zanzibar were finally settled in 1914 with a joint agreement between the British and German governments and a payment of £200,000 to the Sultan of Zanzibar. So now we'll get on to some of the coinage. The German East Africa Company quickly set about establishing plantations, improving coastal harbors, and building railroads. The most important of these works involved the development of the port of Dar es Salaam and the building of a railroad from there through Tabora to Ujiji on Lake Tanganyika. Other lines were built connecting the northern port of Tanga to the plantations near Mount Kilimanjaro. At first, sisal, which was a palm product, basically it was used for rope and other things, was the colony's most valuable crop, soon to be followed by coffee, rubber, and cotton. The natives' situation was improved by the abolition of slavery, the establishment of a police force, a postal system, compulsory education for native boys, and the elimination of smallpox and other diseases through an intensive program to vaccinate the native population. Because the area had been famous for its inhospitality as far as disease and just massive rates of death from a variety of causes, including among the animals. The lowland areas were inhospitable to cattle because of the tsetse fly. So the Germans tried to improve all that so that they could make the colony a profitable venture. In April 1888, the company leased the coastal strip opposite to Zanzibar from the Sultan Khalifa bin Said for 50 years. Its attempt to take over the administration led to a general revolt along the coast of what is now Tanzania. So the Arabs that lived along the coast were not happy with German rule, and they revolted. Since the company could only barely hold on to Dar es Salaam and the other major posts that they had at Bagamoyo, with German Navy help, the government had to step in and create the German East Africa Colony. Soon after the organization of the German East Africa Company, it was realized that a more diversified coinage than the Maria Theresa thaler was required to grow commerce in the colony. In order to facilitate international trade, the thalers then in circulation were fixed at a value of 3 German marks per thaler. In order to create a colonial currency for use within the colony, the German East Africa Company in 1890 established an exchange rate based on the paisa. The paisa, which was an Indian denomination known as the paise, was familiar with Arab and Indian traders along the coast, and so it was chosen because of its familiarity. This was assigned the value of 64 paisa to 1 rupee, 1 Indian rupee. This was the standard value in the western portions of India that had influenced East Africa. This coin was minted for 3 years, 1890 to 1892, before being dropped in favor of a whole new currency tied to the German mark. In 1891, the relationship between the German East Africa Company rupee and the German mark was fixed at 1 rupee equals 1.33 mark, or 4 marks equals 3 rupian. The name rupee was adopted for colonial use to distinguish the coinage from Indian and other rupees then in circulation. Silver coins in denominations of quarter, half, and 1 rupee, along with a 2 rupee piece, which was only issued from 1892 to 1894, were struck over the next few years. They were minted in Berlin of 0.917 silver and to a common design. The obverse featured Wilhelm II in military dress, wearing a helmet with the German eagle perched on top. The legend surrounding the bust of Wilhelm reads, William II, Emperor. The reverse bears the arms of the German East Africa Company, consisting of a lion and palm tree with a date beneath. The inscription surrounding the central shield reads, Deutsche Ostafrikanische Gesellschaft, the German East Africa Company, with value expressed in rupees below. So they created a handsome coin, one of the nicer colonial coins for the region for many years. And the 2 rupee, as I said, was short-lived and fairly rare. Production of the series commenced in 1891 and lasted until 1904 when the final company Rupean coins were struck. Some years saw no mintage figures, as the coins were struck only to meet the demands of existing commerce. Mintage figures for German East Africa Company coins are low as compared to the later government issues, making them relatively expensive today. And here you see the examples of the other silver coins that were issued, the quarter, half, and the rupee, which saw a fairly extensive circulation. By 1891, the German government realized that the East Africa Company was unable to manage the colony. The imperial government, anxious to exploit the colony's potential and develop railroad communications, declared a protectorate over the region formerly ruled by the company, settled financial accounts with the colonists and natives, and immediately took over colonial administration. In 1897, the imperial government renamed the region the Colony of German East Africa, Deutsch Ostafrika, also known as DOA for short. Shortly afterwards, a colonial department was set up in Berlin to assist in the development. From 1904 onwards, financial management of the colony was taken over by the Imperial German government, and a bank was formed for the colony. And here's what the new redesign looked like. Essentially the same obverse with a simpler reverse, the palm trees crossed, palm branches crossed. So the DOA monetary system consisted of silver rupee coins and fractions. Bronze subsidiary coinage of Heller denominations were used to distinguish them from the pfennig used in the fatherland. The Heller was valued at 100 Heller equals 1 rupee, thus decimalizing the German East Africa rupee. DOA coins eventually consisted of 12 types. The first of the new DOA coins were minted starting in 1904 in the following denominations: half, 1 Heller, quarter, half, and 1 rupees. They were initially supplemented by a bronze, by just the 2 bronze coins, the half and 1 Heller, which later expanded as the need for small change increased among the natives. The obverse of the silver rupee coins was unchanged from the German East Africa Company issue. New dies were cut for the reverses, consisting of the value, i.e. 1 rupee, in the center, surrounded by crossed palm fronds with Deutsch Ostafrika above and the date with mint mark below. The bronze Heller denominations depicted the imperial crown at the center, Deutsch Ostafrika above, and the date below on the obverse, and the value surrounded by crossed laurel branches on the reverse. New 5 Heller and 10 Heller copper nickel, new 5 Heller bronze, and then 10 Heller copper nickel coins were added in 1908. In 1913, the bronze 5 Heller was replaced by a much smaller copper nickel type with a center hole. A similar 10 Heller copper nickel piece was struck from 1909 to 1914. All pre-World War I coins were minted at the Berlin and Hamburg mints in Germany. Coins minted in Berlin carried the A mint mark, while those made in Hamburg were struck with a mint mark J. In some years, production was assigned to both mints for the same coin to keep up with demand. Mintage figures for Heller coins ran into millions per year for each denomination, while the silver rupee issues seldom exceeded 500,000 in each year. Now we'll go on to talk a little bit about the paper money. Now, the company did provide coinage, but there was never enough coinage to go around. So there was always a need for some sort of scrip or private issues. And even when the German government became involved, it took a while for the production of coinage to catch up, and for the the larger amounts of money, they used paper money. So private money was an early feature of the colony. and included notes that were issued by the private firms in Bagamoyo, Dar es Salaam, and Zanzibar. Emergency notes were issued during the Maji Maji Rebellion of 1903 and 1904. And there was also postal currency, ship money for the squadron which patrolled the coast during the rebellion, and military credit notes along with private plantation notes. All of these are rare, and you don't see them very often. There tend to be a lot more of them actually in Germany than you see in the U.S. As far as collectability and just seeing them available at shows or on the market. The Deutsche Ostafrikanische Bank was formed to serve the colony in 1904 once the colonial administration took over the financial aspects. The right to issue banknotes was granted on 15th January 1905, and soon after, the first official paper money was introduced. These notes were produced by the Leipzig firm of Giesecke and de Vriant. Sorry about the pronunciation, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. On special paper with the company's cross and star watermark pattern. 5, 10, 50, and 100 Rupean notes were issued. In 1912, a 500 rupee note was added also. These were issued in Dar es Salaam, featuring the following common elements: red serial numbers, Deutsche Ostafrikanische Bank at the top, the value in writing, and numerals, and the printer's name appearing in the lower right border of the front. The 5 Rupean banknote has an engraving of a lion and lioness on the velt. The 10 Rupean note shows a harbor view of Dar es Salaam with a ship at anchor. And overall, these notes were quite attractive and were pretty popular. You can find them today, many of them highly worn because they were used quite a bit, except for the largest denominations. The reverses consist of geometric patterns containing the bank name with the denomination in words and numerals as well. They circulated mostly in the coastal cities because of their large amounts. I mean, these are amounts of money that wouldn't be needed in the interior by the locals very much, but they were used by merchants for larger transactions. But they could be found throughout most of the colony. Another problem was that coins were preferred in the interior, in part because they were silver and copper as opposed to paper, which was still questionable as far as the natives in the interior thought in terms of value. The last shipment of the banknotes arrived in Dar es Salaam aboard the blockade runner Marie von Stetten during World War I, just before the port's capture in 1916. So here's a sample of notes. So here's the 100 note. Looks very nice and professional. Looks like something you would see almost anywhere in the world as far as design and attractiveness. There's the reverse. You can see the geometric designs, all designed to prevent counterfeiting. Here's my favorite of the notes because I love the lion scene on the velt. And you can see this note was heavily worn, folded, used quite a bit, a little bit of foxing on it. So that's what we see as World War I starts to loom. And the next part of the story will be about World War I and some of the emergency monies and what occurred in German East Africa during that time. At the outbreak of World War I, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Emil von Leto Vorbeck was Commander-in-Chief of military forces in German East Africa. He had 218 white officers and NCOs with 2,542 Askaris, native troops under his command. He was the son of a famous Prussian military family, and his military experience included action in the Boxer Rebellion and in German Southwest Africa during the Hottentot and Herero Rebellion in 1904-1908. But his exploits in German East Africa during World War I is what made him famous. He was one of the very few German leaders to be generally acclaimed a hero by both sides in the conflict, including those Allied generals who fought against him. For over 4 years during World War I, he kept large Allied forces chasing him, but always succeeding in defeating or avoiding enemy attacks and evading capture or destruction, all in the interest of distracting as many troops, Allied troops, as possible from the European theater of war, with a maximum of no more than 15,000 men during 1915, 1916. He was able to attract over 180,000 Allied troops to basically chase him across the backcountry very successfully for 4 years. And here you see a picture of him and some of the troops that served under him. The Germans had been notable because they used their African troops as regular soldiers. They didn't treat them as inferior soldiers, though they did have inferior weapons compared to European troops. And the result was that their African troops responded very well and became a standard by which other European powers trained their troops after the war. Von Leto had only sporadic communication with his government after the commencement of hostilities in 1914, and no communication whatsoever after 1916. Yet he managed to use hit-and-run tactics to tie down hundreds of thousands of Allied troops for 4 years, basically. Over 130 different generals and troops from Britain, Belgium, Portugal, South Africa, and India, as well as African colonial troops, went into action against a maximum of 15,000 German East African soldiers during the course of the war. At times, the Allied forces in the theater totaled over 150,000 men. The campaign took place across almost all of East Africa, stretching from modern Kenya to south to Mozambique and west to the lakes of Central Africa, where there was an interesting campaign which has been memorialized in a famous movie that you may have heard of called The African Queen, which was based on the adventures of some of the participants. The British in particular had some very strange people who did some amazing exploits on the lakes. And that's what the African Queen story is based on. Now, we'll go to the money that was issued during the war, salvaging parts of the scuttled Königsberg and the wrecks of several blockade runners. The Königsberg was a light cruiser that was in the East African area. It was actually Dar es Salaam when the war was declared. The light cruisers were designed to be commerce raiders. So it went into the Indian Ocean and started a commerce raiding campaign. But there's a long story that there's a story that we're going to go into in a second. But this ship and others helped provide the materials that allowed the Germans to make use of those limited resources they had to produce paper money and coinage during the war. So a press was set up in Tabora from parts salvaged from the Königsberg when it was sunk, which was then transferred from Dar es Salaam to Tabora, actually. Let me back up a second. During the war, Dar es Salaam was the capital of the colony, but as the war progressed, the British controlled all the coastal areas of East Africa. So the German administration was moved on to the interior, and the capital was set up at Tabora, which was in the western part of the central part of the colony. Now, the money that we see here was actually produced in the colony and was produced from basically scrap machinery and materials and die makers that were found among the merchant shops, the iron workers and other metal workers. So they were able to actually create a die and coin making industry from nothing practically. So as the administration transferred to Tabora, they still needed to produce small change in order to pay the locals and continue business. So they created these 5 and 20 Heller coins, along with a very famous issue, which we'll talk about in a second, the 15 Rupean coin. Now, since the machinery was so crude, frequent breakdowns and delays were encountered. The copper for this mintage was obtained from spent cartridges and artillery shell casings, and the gold from limited local sources. This 5 Heller and 20 Heller, these coins have the same basic idea as the previous coins in that they show the crown, the imperial crown, and then they have a date, 1916, at the center, with DOA for Deutsches Ostafrika below. The reverse has a value at the center surrounded by 2 crossed laurel branches, so similar to what you would expect normally. So they did a good job of reproducing something that would be familiar to the local people. And then they added the mint mark T for Tabora. A total of 300,000 brass and 1,600,000 copper 20 Heller coins were produced before the Tabora mint fell to the invading Belgian army. So these things are actually fairly relatively common for an emergency money. And the 5 Heller pieces, which are actually a little bit more rare, were produced in smaller total numbers. We don't know the total numbers exactly, but something like 30,000 of the 5 Heller coins were struck in brass in 2 different types. The last coins to be struck at the Tabora Mint were the Tabora sovereigns. These gold 15 rupee coins are dated 1916 and were equivalent to the English sovereign, which was legal tender in British East Africa and Zanzibar. Governor Schnee, who was the governor of the colony during the war, authorized the use of gold, which was available at the Sekeke mine close to Tabora. The Sekeke mine was going to be used for the next 30 years before it ran out a decade or two before Tanzania became independent. It was a fairly productive mine at the time. So bullion worth 1 million gold marks was available from the mine for use in creating these 15 rupee coins. The obverse of the gold coin depicts the crowned imperial eagle within a circle of dots with Deutsche Ostafrika above and 15 Rupean below. On the reverse is a wonderful image of a trumpeting elephant. This is one of my favorite coins of the area. It's just a great depiction, and it has the mountains in the background, presumably Kilimanjaro at the center, but that's not quite clear. The date of 1916 and T for Tabora appear below. At that time, Tabora was the center of the ivory trade, so the choice of an elephant for the reverse was quite appropriate. With the flow of money from Germany having been cut off, a shortage of coins quickly developed as hoarding became common. By early 1915, the situation had become critical, forcing Governor Schnee to order the bank to print an interim money supply. The issue of these interim banknoten was restricted to the duration of the war. How and where the notes were to be printed was a big problem. There were no high quality security printing facilities in the colony, but there was a newspaper that was being printed at Dar es Salaam. So that provided the machinery. That, along with the good luck that a paper shipment came in with among one of the last blockade runners to arrive in the colony, it brought enough of a supply of durable paper that could actually be used for money and last, that was reasonably uniform, so that emergency money was allowed to be printed for the rest of the war. Since the equipment existed and the paper became available, the notes soon began to appear in March 1915. The first of them were the 20 rupee notes. Soon thereafter, the presses were busily engaged in running off series after series of 1, 5, 10, 50, and 200 rupean interim mark notes as well. The Deutsche Ostafrikanische Bank decided to print interim notes at Dar es Salaam and Tabora simultaneously for security reasons, since they never could tell when Dar es Salaam would be raided or finally occupied by the British. Between 1915 and 1917, emergency notes were issued for use throughout the colony and were carried by the troops and local officials and workers within the areas of Tabora and beyond, all the way down to Mozambique. So here you have, well, first off, you have the 20 rupiah note issued in 15 March 1915. And then the reverse with various warnings and what the note was intended for and a serial number. You get the 5 rupee note, also issued in 1915. This is in August, 15th August in Tabora. Similar otherwise, other than the denomination. And then you get a 1 rupee note. Now there are lots of varieties of these, depending on when they were issued. Minor changes in design. The paper color changes quite a bit from issue to issue and from note to note. This one's issued in February of 1916. You got the color marking on the back, cancellation. Then, as things began to get worse, as the major areas, the towns and manufacturing centers were occupied, the German forces were forced to make cruder types of notes based on whatever printing equipment they had available with the forces. So this is an example of a series of emergency money known as Bush notes that were produced while the fighting was going on in the field. They were of 4 denominations only, 1, 5, 10, and 50 rupiah, and bore the inscription Interim's banknote, as did their predecessors. All are dated 1 July 1917, except for the 50 rupee, which carries a date of 1st October. The notes were hand-signed by bank officials Stelling and Kirst, who were actually marching with the armies and acted as their paymaster and accountants, basically, and meticulously numbered to keep track of the notes so that they could be eventually repaid. They contained the simple phrase, Wir zahlen gegen dies Note. We count this note as an interim banknote. So they're basically saying, we've signed this and we're giving our word that these notes will be redeemed. And then they've got the value. Interesting and very crude. And then you get the reverse. Just stamps on there. So, to go back to the war, to give an overview of that, in August 1914, the British made a preemptive strike against Dar es Salaam, hoping the colony would surrender. Overruling the colonial governor Schnee, who was inclined toward a truce, von Leto Vorbeck took the fight to British East Africa, where he inflicted great losses. And this became the start of the legend that von Leto Vorbeck would build, and which would result in a short numismatic history after the war, which is what we'll get to next. In June 1914, the cruiser Königsberg, which you see right here, had been sent out to German East Africa, as we mentioned earlier. The arrival of the Königsberg posed a threat to the Royal Navy and England's maritime trade should the war break out. As it did, the Königsberg went off on a raiding expedition and actually captured and sank the city of Winchester, the first merchant casualty ship of the war. On 20th September 1914, she surprised and sank the British protected cruiser HMS Pegasus in the Battle of Zanzibar off of the island. So she started out with a bang, but things got worse very quickly. So here we have scenes from the blockade and sinking of the Königsberg. Königsberg retreated to the Rufiji Delta, which was a major river in the southern part of the German colony, and she had to repair her engines. Before the repairs could be completed, the British located the ship, and because their cruisers were bigger and heavier, they were unable to steam into the river to destroy it. So they set up a blockade, and this set the scene for an amazing story that lasted for months and months, and included some of the first aerial reconnaissance and bombing attempts ever done in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And eventually the British sent 2 monitors, which were coastal ships with super heavy guns, to sink the German cruiser. But they did not arrive until June of 1915. And in July, they managed to do enough damage to force the ship to be scuttled on the river bottom. And but that wasn't the end of the story, because the crew salvaged all 10 of the major guns from the ship, and those guns were turned into field guns, which were used in the campaign to fight on land. And the Königsberg story continues after that, when it was finally broken up for scrap in 1963. And today, apparently, you can still see the remains of the last parts of the ship in the Rufiji Delta area. So von Leto Vorbeck was never defeated in battle, and only surrendered after learning about the armistice ending World War I 3 days after the cessation of fighting. What had happened was he and his, at that point, 1,200 troops were still playing hit and run with the British, and a British bicycle courier was able to find him and show him several copies of newspapers, English and German and Portuguese, to show him that the war had indeed ended, and convince him to surrender his troops. So his troops became the last German troops to surrender in World War I. So that occurred on 25th November 1918, two weeks after the official armistice of 11th November. And he still at that time had about 1,300 troops under his command. The British repatriated the white German soldiers, but confined the Askaris in squalid camps. And von Leto Vorbeck refused to leave his camp until he had won promises of decent treatment and early release for his black troops, which is one of the reasons why he was popular among the Allies and the Germans, and as well his colonial troops. Returning to Germany as a national hero, one of the very few military heroes of World War I for the Germans, he became active in politics and tried to establish a conservative opposition to the Nazis. He was able to bring some of his black officers with him to serve in the German Freikorps as well. When Hitler offered him the ambassadorship to the court of St. James in 1935, he told Hitler something very uncomplimentary and was returned to retirement on a very bare income. But interestingly, the Jan Smuts, the commander of the South African troops against him, along with several of the British generals, sent him support during the 1930s in order to make sure that he was doing okay. It's interesting when you see enemy generals supporting each other in a situation like this. It's an amazing comment on his leadership and his relationships with how he fought his war. The last part of that story is that he never forgot his colonial troops, and when he returned to East Africa in 1953, he returned to East Africa in 1953, and his surviving soldiers welcomed him at the pier. In fact, they sort of kidnapped him from the British officials and carried him through the streets of Dar es Salaam in an impromptu parade, enraging the British, but there was nothing they could do about it. And when he returned to Europe, he campaigned to provide for their welfare because they had not been paid their back pay. Eventually, he died at the age of 93 in 1964. And when he did, the West German government actually flew two former Ascaris to Germany to attend his funeral. And in 1963, they actually repaid the Ascaris. And so here's an example of a World War I colonial veterans badge that was issued to all the was available to all the veterans of the German colonial fighting in World War I. So the Pacific, the Africa, and Tsingtao or Kaohsiung in China. Well, all of this points to a bit of nostalgia and notoriety in the sense of fame for the Germans regarding their colonies. And the result was a series of notes that I put under Colonial Remembrances. So when Germany experienced a period in the 1920s when cities and small towns all issued their own emergency money during the depression after the war in Germany, this Notgeld was issued in huge numbers, covering all sorts of different topics. But one of the topics was the old colonies. So here we have an example of this note, which is a German Hanseatic Colonial Remembrance Day. The German Hanseatic company was a shipping company. They shipped goods as well as passengers all through the colonies, and during the interwar period in the 1920s and 30s, they were still active as cargo and passenger ships. The series was issued so that it could actually be used in payment, but was also primarily designed as a collectible. So here you have different examples of them. You've got Karl Vormann and then von Bismarck. Dr. Karl Peters, the founder of German East Africa. Wismann, the second leader of the colony. A. Luderitz, another pioneer of the German colonial effort. And von Leto Vorbeck, the famous general who had one moment of light for the Germans in World War I. Actually, just to go back to that, Wismann, who had colonized the rest of German East Africa while Peters had backed out, was interesting because he treated the indigenous people with respect. He insisted on fairness, respect of customs, and the use of Swahili, the native language. Some consider him Germany's greatest African, and because of that, several monuments were erected to commemorate his accomplishments, which is why he appears here. Now, there is another series that was issued, and this one specifically mentions each of the colonies. So here you have Deutsche Ostafrika, Southwest Africa, Cameroon in West Africa, Togo also in West Africa, Kaohsiung, which is the colony in Tsingtao, China, which is where you get the current beer. The Germans built a beer factory in Kaohsiung, which still produces beer today. And the German South Pacific. So after the end of the story comes when, after Leto Vorbeck's death, the West German Bundestag voted to deliver back pay to the 350 surviving Askaris in Africa. The Weimar Republic had provided pension payments to the Askaris, but due to the interruptions of the Great Depression and World War II, the Parliament of the Federal, they were unable to make good on those payments, and the Federal Government Republic of Germany voted in 1964 to fund the back pay of the Askaris still alive. The West German embassy at Dar es Salaam identified approximately 350 of these men and set up a temporary cashier's office at Mwanza in Lake Victoria. Only a few claimants could produce the certificates given to them in 1918. The British officials mocked the Germans for trying to do this because they said every person out of the bush would come out and claim their pay, but the banker who had brought the money came up with an idea, and as each claimant stepped forward, he was handed a broom and ordered in German to perform the manual of arms. Not one of the 350 approximately failed the test, a testament to their memory after 45 plus years. And with that, we will end our story. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them through chat. And I guess Sam can field them.
Yep.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you very much, Douglas. All right. Well, had a question just come in. Someone wanted to know, how rare is the 1916 gold 15 rupiah? They said this would make a very nice addition to a collection of coins based upon the well-known and used sovereign. They also want to know if you know the mintage and how available they are. Because, yeah, of course, with mintage, that's one thing, but surviving numbers is a whole nother.
Right.
I was trying to look through to see if I could find it in a book, but I didn't have it readily available. So
the World Coin Book actually does have it, the Standard Catalog of World Coins. They don't have a mintage. We know that up to 1 million marks worth of gold was made available to produce the coins, but we don't have exact counts. They are not super, super rare. They are, well, genuine ones are harder to find, and they are quite popular. So, you know, you're going to spend a couple $1,000s minimum for a decent example of these. So I can't answer exactly how rare they are, but they're not exceedingly rare. You can find them. It's just if you do, they're so popular, they're going to be fairly expensive.
Sure, understood.
My answer to that was to get a friend of mine who does hobo nickels to make me a wonderful example of that elephant design from the reverse of the coin as a hobo nickel. So that's my consolation.
Yeah, it's a beautiful coin. Yeah, second I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind one of those in my collection. Wouldn't turn it down at all.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, I love colonial world coinage myself, so I'm biased. I love the presentation. Douglas, thanks again. Really appreciate it. That was the only question I really saw come in. Of course, someone
Sure.
else, let's see. Excellent presentation from John. Let's see. Oh, Okay, yes. See,
Sorry about
someone
that.
else
Somehow yep.
has a okay. Oh, had one other question. Oh wow, this is a tough one. Where is the best place to buy currency from German colonies? The best way I would answer that is go to the ANA website, money.org. Right at the very top of the home screen where it says find a dealer, you can search by area of specialty for certain dealers. They may or may not be in your area, but that's one suggestion I have. Doug, I'm not sure if you have any other suggestions.
There are a number of German sites where you can get onto their version of V coins, where German dealers can get onto a general site and then list their items. And if you look under emergency money, World War I money, things like that, you can find a lot of anything from not geld to some of the German East Africa stuff being sold. But when it comes to the United States, the Stephen Album actually has some of the material on a fairly regular basis. There's a guy named Carl Stevens that has some World War I material. There are a few world dealers that go on the show circuit, such as it restarts now after COVID, that do have them. But it's hit and miss. I mean, there's no, the best source, especially for any of the paper, is from the German version of V coins. I don't have the name right off the bat for the site, but it's not easy to find, especially the paper. The coins, world coin dealers often will have one or two, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm wondering maybe Emporium Hamburg. I'm not
Yes,
sure.
Emporium Hamburg is one of the ones that is a participant of that site.
Okay, nice. Yeah, one person also suggested the fun show. Yeah, in about a month down in Orlando, the summer fun show will be going on. So may have a chance there if you're going to be in the area in Central Florida.
Yep.
Let's see,
thanks to Bill Dozell. Yes, it's MA Shops. That is the place I'm thinking of.
Right.
Thanks, Bill. And then the Germans use a railway car as a mint and the locomotive? They did use a locomotive, several locomotive engines that were taken from their railways in Tabora for production, and one of them apparently was used as for striking. So yes, they used all sorts of whatever they could come up with to make do during the war, because they just had such shortages.
Let's see. Someone else also wanted to know, do you think someone could assemble a complete set of these coins with all dates and denominations?
Yes, I believe you can. I haven't tried it. I personally have a typeset of them. There are a couple that are very hard to find. The biggest thing is you have to be very careful for some of them. Some of the silver ones, particularly the 2 rupee piece, is very heavily counterfeited. A lot of them have been made in India, and they're quite good unless you really know what they're supposed to look like. So it can be hard to find. The 2 rupee is generally the hardest. When it comes to the paper money, I haven't seen any of the colonial notes, and I know that they exist in Germany. I spoke to a German collector at one point and said, yeah, they're available there, but I haven't actually seen any. And so there, I think it would be very difficult to try to complete a set of emergency notes from World War I or pre-World War I in the colony.
Yeah, the not geld. We have that in the Money Museum collection, correct? I remember you showing me some a few years back.
Yes, we have the not geld. Yeah, and they're not super easy to find, but they are available, and they're not terribly expensive when you do find them. It's just you don't see them in the US very much, and they get mixed up in Germany with the whole run of Nachtgeld. So it's you're sort of looking for a needle in a haystack because there's so much different material.
Yeah, something else for me to look for in junk bins. I like it. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Someone else asked. Well, I said, great presentation. Can you show the references you used again?
Yeah, that's a very partial one. If you'd like, I can send you a more complete one. If you can send an email to me at mud@money.org, and I will. It'll take me a week or two, but I'll get a more complete set of references. There's different articles, but there are also books about the stories of what went on and about the colony itself that sort of mention the money a little bit. There's the best resources for the paper are in German, so they're tough to access. But there's some stuff online as well that is in English, and one of the references is here. Let's see, some notes of necessity, which let me see here, which appeared in the Banknote News, London, issue number 42. That is a great article for that type of material.
Doug, someone else also asked, they said the 20 Heller are counterfeited.
All of the 20 Heller, I'm assuming you're talking about the Königsberg ones. The story of the light cruiser Königsberg is so famous among the collectors and people interested in that area that those 20 Heller and 5 Heller pieces are counterfeited because they're relatively crude. It's easy to do, and they're because of their fame as having been made using the equipment from the Königsberg and made from the shells of the Königsberg. So they're famous from that standpoint. It's almost like collecting trench art for militaria collectors. So yes, they are counterfeited, but there's still enough of the genuine ones out there. If you just have to either study the material or talk to some of the dealers that focus more on that area to be able to make sure that they're genuine. I can't really give you any guides as to what some of the guidelines are for identifying them, because I haven't seen enough of them to be expert at that either. So
sure. All right. Well, Doug, again, sir, Dankeschön. Wonderful, enjoyable presentation. I hope everyone learned at least something today. Again, I do want to thank Gray Sheet for their partnership with the ANA eLearning Academy. We hope you will join us for our future webinars. Please check the ANA website, money.org, for more information under the events and webinar heading. Tomorrow at the same time, we will have Brad Seidel doing a talk on Feuchtwanger tokens. Did I say that correctly, Douglas?
Feuchtwanger.
Feuchtwanger. Nice. Jawohl. And then, Thursday, a gentleman named Sam Gelbert will be giving a presentation called Oh No It Ain't, about damage versus error coins. So again, that'll wrap up our money talks from the canceled National Money Show. Again, like I said before, please check the ANA website, money.org, under the events and webinars heading for more information. Everyone have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And please continue to enjoy our hobby. Douglas, thanks again, sir.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for everybody for listening. Have a great one.